A bit of a flutter, a roll of the dice. When the chips are down, a gentleman's wager. Your number is up. May the odds ever be in your favour. It seems like the language of gambling is everywhere. Games of chance are embedded in Aussie culture, in our economy, and in our political system. So is gambling all just a bit of harmless fun? Don't bet on it.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Somewhere between 80 and 160,000 Australians struggle with problem gambling. We have the highest level of gambling per capita in the world. In this month's Signs of the Times magazine, an article by Miguel Valdivia explores these issues, which got me thinking. Several years back, I did some casual work at an addiction treatment centre run by the Salvation Army on New South Wales' Central Coast. The senior managers were David and Beth Twivey. The Salvos prefer married couples to work together in those kinds of roles. Since that time, the Twiveys have worked in North Queensland, establishing another residential recovery service, and they're now back in New South Wales, this time in Western Sydney, working with the local community. I wondered if David Twivey's expertise in dealing with addictions extended to problem gambling. It did, and in a more personal way than I'd anticipated. I caught up with Major David Twivey on the phone.
Gambling is one of those sort of accepted norms in our community, but once somebody sort of goes over that sort of accepted norm and goes into problematic behaviour with gambling, it really affects their family, their immediate friends, relationships, affects their financial situation, of course. But it's really the most expensive habit or bad habit that a person can have. And, as far as drugs and alcohol goes, they fade into insignificance when you look at what people can lose on gambling, just a poker machine at night or some lotto and whatever. It can really take the better of people. Watching football on a Friday night where, you're encouraged to bet on the match and then bet halfway through the match and whatever. So it really is a problem for the whole community. Just recently we had I had a barrister ring me and I've known him for quite a few years and he rang me and he was distraught over the phone and really I didn't know that he had, to me he seemed quite all together and, he was a friend. And then he just went on to tell me that he'd lost $50,000 in the last week.
50,000, 50,000, wow.
That's right. And I just, that was just, really a left field. I wasn't expecting that for him to be, that much of a problem to him. But he just said he's been doing it very, hiding the fact that he's a gambler from his wife and from his family, and but now it just got the better of him. He thought he had a system, with betting on horses, and he thought it couldn't possibly lose, and there he was, $50,000 that he'd owed from this gambling, and he was looking at having to remortgage his house and go through the shame of telling his wife and telling his kids, and it was an awful thing, awful situation. But I tried to encourage him that he had to take responsibility for that and just maybe go and talk to other people who have got through this problem themselves, and look for some support. He certainly had my support, but a daily support to stop him from using that gambling addiction on a daily basis.
Boy, it really does, make you realise how widespread, the issue of gambling is. I mean, you mentioned horse racing, for example. We have the Melbourne Cup every year, the race that stops a nation, as they say. And in almost every pub and club in the nation, there are poker machines in the corner. And as you said, you watch a sporting contest on free-to-air television, and there's the ads for sports betting. It's really everywhere, isn't it? I mean, do you see a particular type of gambling that seems to be, tripping up people more than any other sort?
Well, certainly online gambling has increased. With the technology of being able to, take special types of bets and a variety of different ways that you can bet and instantaneous betting, and I think that poker machines have that draw card of being able to, you see the wheels going in front of you, and oh look, I've just missed out on a big payout. The next one will win, and then they pull the lever and it doesn't come out. It must be the next one. So it draws people into a fantasy. It's actually I've felt that myself in lots of ways. My sister, for some unknown reason, for the first time ever, she gave me a lotto ticket for my birthday this year, and there I was, sort of thinking, when's it drawn? And how much is it worth? To the winner. And she said, it's a $50 million first prize. And I was driving away thinking, now how could I spend that $50 million? And
it's very tempting, isn't it?
Well, it's really, it was just, I personally got over it very quickly, and when I rang up the number or put the number in the computer, I forgot what I did, and it said no pay. That was the end of it, and it was certainly not something that I would do. But
Okay.
I can see that thought of that fantasy that is associated with it. That my life can be so much better. I can go and give money away. I can, all these sort of fantasies.
Yeah, you mentioned, a recent incident with gambling, but I understand that you haven't always been a uniformed Salvation Army officer, that you've had a personal history yourself with addiction. Was gambling a part of that story in your past?
Oh, look, definitely. I came to the Salvation Army in 1983, and I had a problem with drugs and gambling. I came from a family who raced horses, and gambling was, and my grandfather owning a hotel, and he used to prop me up on his knee, and I played the poker machines when I was about 4 years old in the mornings before the golf club would open.
Wow.
And so it was sort of it was there before me. But and look, my parents were happily putting $5 each way on horses, but I was completely different. I went off on that whole fantasy trip of wanting more and wanting. There was never enough, and it was a cycle of no good ending at all. Must admit, I will never forget a night that we had a horse racing at Howell Park, and the horse was very, it was going to win. So the trainer was pretty certain that it was going to win the race. It had a good draw and whatever, and it was about 10-1 on the betting, and so all my family went out there to watch it race, and I got a as much money as I could, about $300 or something, and then we all went out to the track, and my father said, "Now don't bet," because he knew I was a bit of a prolific better. He said, "Just don't bet until the last race, because that's when our horse is going to win." But the second last race came and went, and I was left with $10. It had all gone, and then I put the $10 on the horse, and it romped home, the horse that we knew was going to win. But I was just left with basically less than what I came with. So that was
wow.
that was the dead end story for me. I won't forget that day.
So in terms of stopping gambling, was this something that happened as a part of your involvement with the Salvation Army? What brought you to the Salvation Army? Was it a Christian sort of thing that drew you in, a conversion experience, or was it dealing with your addiction that brought you to the Salvation Army?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, I came to my life was the pits. I basically, drugs had brought me to my knees, and I was addicted to heroin, and gambling was probably a secondary point at that stage because of my physical addiction to drugs, and so my parents were actually the ones who called the police and said, this is it. You've got to do something. And I spent 3 nights in the Hornsby lockup for stealing off them. And then the magistrate on the Monday morning said, look, you can go to Long Bay Jail for stealing off your parents, or you can go to the Salvation Army. Which way do you want to go? And so I had made the decision for Christ when Billy Graham came to Australia in about 1971, 72. And, that was a very much conversion experience. And I held on to that in my recovery again. I started to think, look, God can help me get through this. And he doesn't want me to be that person that I had been for so many years. And so, the Salvation Army was certainly part of their program, was to present God in a way that he could give you the strength to overcome, give you the strength for new hope. I grasped hold of that with both hands. And look, God has been certainly my salvation through that. I felt God's calling to go into ministry, and so I've been a minister in the Salvation Army for, this will be my 30th year as a Salvation Army officer.
Okay, so a captain or a major in the Salvation Army is similar to like a clergy person in other denominations, is it?
That's right. I did a diploma of theology back in the late 1980s, and I've done various other diplomas, and I've got a master's in health, which I felt led to do when I started working in drug and alcohol. So yeah, it's all been sort of part of a process. I think my life, when I've handed it to God, he sort of said, well, you need to know more about this. You need to sort of grow in your knowledge of what addiction is, and I believe I've surrendered that, and today, I couldn't want for really a better life. I've got 3 lovely adult children, and I've got a loving wife, and really life is very good. And so, I would say to anybody who has an issue in their life that there is hope. And certainly Jesus came to bring hope. That was his promise, and he's true to his promise if we hand ourselves to him.
Oh, that's really good to hear that transformation that has happened for you, and it's interesting to hear how that sort of Salvation Army rehab centre tough love was a crucial part in you giving up addiction, including the addiction to gambling. I understand that Gamblers Anonymous is one of the most successful ways to treat people with problem gambling issues, and it's based on the 12-step sort of model, similarly to Alcoholics Anonymous. Was that the sort of program that you went through with the Salvation Army, and is it something that the Salvos are still using now?
Well, it's certainly something that I went through myself, and these days, over the last 30 years, the Salvation Army has developed different other methods of supporting people. We live in a very complex world, so the Salvation Army has has tried to adjust their ways of dealing with people, supporting people who have gambling addiction, but still, the bones of recovery are pretty nicely played out in the 12 steps of AA, NA, GA. Firstly, you admit you've got a problem. That's the first step. Yeah. And then the second step is came to believe that a power greater than yourself could restore you to sanity.
And of course, that fits really well with your Christian ethic, I guess, because you're saying, look, by myself, I'm hopeless, but I really need, God to be here to help me overcome this issue. So it dovetails very nicely for the Salvation Army, doesn't it?
Yes, I believe so. And it's and for some people it does require some psychiatric help or psychological help. Because of the complex life in which we live, and that's just part of the process of, I believe, of the 12 steps. If you could rewrite the 12 steps today, you wouldn't be changing the 12 steps. You'd just be adding some things, like some people require some specialised help. And I think, I'm sure that it's I believe that Jesus would support these ways of being able to support people, because I have seen the value of different medications for people to actually help them to get their lives back on track, and it's the same for a gambler. A gambler needs to work out the issues that it's not really a normal behaviour to go out there and lose $50,000 of your of money. Doesn't matter who you are. Really.
I was going to ask you about that, Major Twivey, because you're in a very good position in your professional life and with your personal story to sort of make this judgment and this comparison, because coming down from heroin, for example, is infamously difficult, and people go through all sorts of fevers and pains and cramps, and it's just a horrific physical thing to do. And then somebody says, well, you've got a gambling addiction, but there's no physical dependence, there's no chemical involved that you're trying to sort of get off or come down from or detox from. So in what sense is gambling accurately described as an addiction? Because there are probably some people out there who say it's just an excuse, to describe your gambling as an addiction. It's not like heroin. It's not a chemical thing. Why don't you just stop?
Well, yeah, it really is the same as a physical addiction. I mean, it affects the mind, and a gambling, someone who's on let's say a heroin, a person who was addicted to heroin, 3 days after stopping heroin, it's pretty well out of your system. You might have a few aches and pains still, but it is out of your system. But then you need to stay stopped and change that whole thinking about where that there's a habit of actually going every day to getting the drug. There's a habit in the fact of like when I have this drug, it makes me feel better, so I can relate to people. And it's the same with gambling. I think like once you sort of stop gambling, it might be it takes probably longer. A couple of weeks need to go past before you're actually getting your head clear enough to actually absorb that you've actually made pretty well your life's a mess. I think I'm trying not to label the gambler here, but I think gamblers are addicted to not telling the truth. In my experience,
what do you mean by that?
A gambler can really knows how to lie, because that's the way they've had to survive, to lie to get, and they lie to themselves as well as the people around them. The truth is very much absent from their mind, so they have this capacity to be able to spin the greatest story and believe it themselves. So that's why I think in some ways, you're an addict, like to heroin. It's pretty obvious that they're an addict to heroin. They've got the physical markings. They've got other things. So lying is sort of soon dissipates. But with gambling, it can go on for a long time.
Yeah, and I guess this is why in the 12 steps, there's one that says, encourages people to make a fearless moral inventory of themselves. And I imagine some of that lying and deceptive and I guess stealing sort of behaviour could very easily come up in that discussion during that step.
That's right. Looking at all the people who you've hurt, and the biggest person who you've hurt is obviously yourself. So, repair yourself first, and then go about repairing the damage you've done to others.
I'm wondering how the Salvation Army works in terms of being a church, because obviously you're helping people with addictions in terms of your social services. But when a person decides that they want to become a Salvationist, whether that's, and I think you have two categories, either an adherent or an actual uniformed person, or the Salvation Army is one of the few churches in Australia these days that encourages its or prohibits its members from drinking alcohol. Is it the same with gambling? Is there a clear line in the sand for members of the Salvation Army at church when it comes to gambling?
The adherence is about accepting that the Salvation Army is my place of worship, my place of my church, the place where I see myself receiving a ministry and contributing back too, in different ways. A part of a community of faith. A soldier, to become a soldier in the Salvation Army is actually it's like a soldier in the regular army. You're actually, and we've taken on this sort of image of military sort of from our founding days 130 odd years ago. But we've taken on this military, where a soldier is equipped for war. He's a person who is, you become a soldier to actually go out there and actively fight for what is right. Not to sit in the pews on a Sunday, but to actually, go out there and into the hotels and talk to people. Sit in shopping centres, talk to people. Go in. Minister to people in airports and train stations, and where we have chaplains, in military forces. It's much more of a commitment to actually doing something. You're a soldier on, and you're at war with the things that would capture other people, that would try to pull other people down.
So as a soldier, Major Twivey, I guess discipline is stricter. Is there a clear expectation on uniformed soldiers that gambling is not a part of their personal behaviours? And if so,
yes.
Why, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Yes, certainly. Look, there is what we call an Articles of War a soldier signs when they become a soldier. One of the things that you undertake is not to drink intoxicating spirits, and that you don't gamble. So they're explicitly said in the Articles of War. There is about 12 different statements that you make that you're going to be an active soldier involved in the mission of Christ, and it's quite an explicit thing that they sign up to. And look, a lot of people can't necessarily sign up to that, and that's fine. Still be a part of the Salvation Army. If they want to have a drink, when they get home from work, that's up to them. But a person who's taken on a role as a soldier, you do make a decision to not to drink and not to gamble.
That is really interesting because, of course, the Bible doesn't specifically, mention gambling. It doesn't sort of say yay or nay about it. Do you feel that as the Salvation Army, a Christian group, that you have some sort of biblical principles that are behind your decision to have that strict a discipline in terms of gambling?
Well, I think Jesus was preempting a lot of things in society, and although he might not have been explicit, there are implicit areas where he says don't allow yourself to be enslaved by things of this world. And I think gambling is certainly one of those areas which people can be enslaved against it. And, the Salvation Army stance is purely how can, a soldier in the Salvation Army, it would be very, very contradictory if the person was actually telling someone to stop gambling if they were gambling themselves. So there's a clear line there that, like the person in the Salvation Army who's trying to help the person who's a gambler is not a gambler themselves. So there's a credibility there. And I think that's what Jesus would want. He would want people who would have some sort of credibility to be able to talk to people and not be a hypocrite.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, back to more the work side of what you do. The Salvation Army obviously is one of Australia's major social services. You must come in contact with government politicians, ministers for this and that department and that sort of thing fairly regularly. Are you able to be strong with them about the damage that gambling is doing to Australians? Because I guess the gambling lobby is a very generous political donor of both major parties in Australia. Are you able to be really clear about the damage gambling is doing to Australia with politicians from who are in government?
Look, we do research constantly through various universities in Australia. We present those facts and figures that it's becoming a more and more a problem to the community, gambling, over the last 10 years, and we present that to the government. Now, they have an opportunity to either accept that and do something about it, or they can turn a blind eye to it. We will still advocate for what we believe to be the right thing. We will still advocate for it, but it's unfortunately some politicians don't, have that same responsibility to gambling, or to, and so we end up with, not getting quite as much satisfaction in the political realm as we'd like. But that doesn't stop us from trying the next person. And like I've met some great politicians over the years, particularly when I was up in Queensland, from both major political parties, who would stand up and make quite supportive stands as far as the anti-gambling and drugs and alcohol but it's really a matter of policy to the people in Canberra, the people who actually hold all the purse strings to actually convince them. Look, the best social changing years for Australia's social services was during Bob Hawke's time as Prime Minister, because Bob Hawke's own daughter had a heroin problem. So, and he was quite open to that. He publicly came out and said that. So we are still reaping the benefits to the programs that Bob Hawke installed into the health system to combat drugs and alcohol. So, sometimes you've got to wait for someone with real passion who's willing to stand up there and who's got the credibility to actually get some social change.
Yeah, I guess it's really important for the government to know that when you speak out, you're not just speaking out on the basis of, your religious convictions, but you're also speaking out on the basis of all those people who do support, the Salvation Army through the Red Shield appeal and your other fundraising efforts. So just as we finish, Major David Twivey, if there is someone listening today who is themselves struggling with gambling, or perhaps they have a family member or a loved one, a friend who's struggling with this issue, what would you advise for them to do as their first couple of steps?
A non-judgmental approach to people who you love is always good. It's pretty hard sometimes, but directing people to services that are available. Certainly, Gamblers Anonymous is one service that is available to people in most major centres around the country. But to go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting takes a lot of courage. So, it might be that if it's a mother who's got a son, or a father who's got a son, or a mother who's got a daughter, or there's a friend down the road who's got a problem and you've heard about it from a parent or something, to actually go with them, to support them in that way. And because as soon as you get, through that first door, then people do make you friendly in most meetings that I've been involved with. They really welcome the newcomer to the meetings. Another way for people to handle this on a first intervention basis is give us a call. There's a gambling helpline, but there's also the Salvos line, which is a 13 Salvo. That's the phone number. Yeah?
Oh, great. Okay.
13 Salvos, and if they ring that number, they'll be put on to someone who can direct them to a local Salvation Army group that will support them.
Major David Twivey has given us the number for the Salvation Army there, 13 Salvos, which works all over Australia. And you also mentioned, Major Twivey, the Gambling Help line. Yep. They have a website, gamblinghelponline.org.au. They also have a phone number, 1800 858 858. And I guess there's always Lifeline, isn't there? 131114. So yeah, a lot of options out there to try as a first option to try to find some information, find out what's happening in your area. Hey, thank you very much, Major David Twivey, for your time and your expertise and your story. Thanks for being a part of Signs of the Times Radio.
Look, thank you very much for your invitation. And I do hope that people will hear this and know that there's hope.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.